Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at 980 Ti performance in early 2017, kind of revisiting this card. I used to have two of them in SLI, and I ended up selling one of them when I upgraded to the GTX 1080, but I still have one of them kicking around that's been in my brother's PC, and I wanted to go ahead and test that again, kind of on some updated games that I wasn't able to test at the time when I had upgraded to the GTX 1080, when I did a comparison with that card when it first came out. So we're going to be revisiting that card here up against the GTX 1080 with 1440p performance to kind of serve as a guide for anyone that's maybe out there with a 980 Ti that is on the fence thinking about upgrading to a 1080 or maybe waiting for Vega. Obviously, that's an option out there as well, and the 1072, and maybe even someone that's thinking about picking up a 980 Ti used if you could find a good deal out there. They're selling for around $350 on eBay, but who knows, maybe you got a friend out there that's willing to give you a good deal for $250, $300. You know, stranger things have happened. So if you can get a good deal on 980 Ti, maybe you could see in this if you're going to be able to get the type of performance that you want to get out there. And I wanted to do 1440p because that's my favorite resolution to game at. I game at 1440, 144 hertz, and I think both of these cards are very capable at gaming at that resolution and that frame rate. I mean, you're not going to be able to get the solid 144 hertz, honestly, in every single game, but for me, anything over 60 hertz is just really gravy. And even in the few titles that on even the likes of a GTX 1080, there are a few titles out there like Watch Dogs 2 where I may dip down below 60 frames. When you have G-Sync, it really helps kick in and really kind of give you a boost in some of those titles where you're going to see dips in your frame rate. So anything 60 FPS and above on these kinds of displays for me is really just icing on the cake. So we're going to take a look at the performance here. You'll be seeing some games playing, obviously, side by side like we always do. I was testing all of these games on 1440p up at the ultra presets, and both of the cards were overclocked. I had additional 200 megahertz on the core and 300 megahertz on the memory for both GPUs, which left our 1080 sitting at around 2025 to 2050 megahertz roughly on the core, while the GTX 980 Ti was up around 1390 to 1410 megahertz on its core when it had its boost all kicked in with the overclock and everything all taken into account. So you'll be seeing those cards side by side, and we'll take a look also at the average and the minimum FPS numbers here in a good selection of titles that we went through here, of a good selection of, kind of 2016 and big titles throughout 2015 and 2014 as well, going back to the likes of GTA 5 and Witcher 3. So let's go ahead and take a look at those 1440p numbers now coming up on your screen. So we could see, impressively enough, the GTX 980 Ti only manages to fall behind in the averages in two titles below 60 frames per second in Division on DirectX 12 and Mirror's Edge Catalyst, but still delivering a very playable frame rate at the highest available presets in those games. So this was on Mirror's Edge Catalyst with the Hyper preset, which is even higher than Ultra. So obviously, if you're willing to go ahead and tweak down some settings in any titles out there that you're struggling to run with a 980 Ti at 1440p, you'll still be able to get well over 60 frames if you can drop down even just like shadows and a couple of like things like ambient occlusion maybe, or your anti-aliasing. I was using FXAA through all of our testing here, or like any type, if like Witcher 3 just has like its own in-game AA that's on or off. I did have that on, so it's like that's the one that I used for that. But you can see the 980 Ti is still holding very strong averages in all these titles here, up over 60 frames, Witcher 3 62 FPS, Rainbow Six Siege 109 frames, while the GTX 1080 obviously mopping things up, showing just how strong of a card it is. Obviously, if you're willing to get out there and shell out the money and pay just north of $600, you can get a very strong graphics card for 1440p performance. If that's what you're wanting to target and you're wanting to get over 60 frames in every game, no question to ask, maxed out settings, then the 1080 is really going to be one of the cards you want to look at. That's why I use it in my personal system. I'm thinking about getting a Titan X, honestly, because I want to get even more, because there are games like Watch Dogs 2 where this card will fall behind. I didn't have that in the testing here today, but I can tell, but you've seen me test it in the past where you've seen it fall behind on the GTX 1080. I have to lower a few settings in that to get a playable frame rate, but it still looks absolutely gorgeous. Battlefield 1, another title in here where you could see the 1080 just kicking ass at 99 FPS average. That was on 64-player Amiens against the 84 FPS of the 980 Ti, though still amazing. Really able to kill it at over 60 frames at 1440p, and if you're even playing at 1080p, obviously, you can kind of do the math there and figure that you'll be getting even more frames than what you're seeing on your screen here. And we will do a quick overlay here now to show you kind of the minimums and seeing where everything is coming in with that, the 980 Ti is still, keeping strong, staying right in there, with about the same, roughly the same performance difference gap. What we saw on the averages, nothing really too out of the norm, apart from we saw on the division, actually, the 980 Ti went out by 1 frame, kind of within the margin of error there on the victory, but very, very close on the minimums nonetheless. That's kind of, I think, one part of the division where it's just loading through some smoke, and you get a really big frame rate drop there, so we saw that on both cards, I guess. But otherwise, the 1080, maintaining its frame rate lead in throughout the minimums, but the 980 Ti is still showing that it can definitely handle 1440p on these games maxed out and keeping the minimums up over like 50 frames, apart from Mirror's Edge Catalyst and Rise of the Tomb Raider. We saw those dipping down into the 40s, but if you're using a G-Sync display, you're probably going to be able to find it very playable, and if you tweak down a few settings, certainly, then you'll be able to get over 60 frames. So I hope this served as a kind of a good guide for anyone out there, like I said, that's thinking about maybe if you get a good deal on a 980 Ti, or you're going to buy one used on eBay. Obviously, consider the GTX 1070. You can pick those up for around $400, and you'll get about 5 to 10 FPS more than the 980 Ti. I guess, kind of looking at the 1080 here, where you're getting about maybe 10 to 20 FPS more than the 980 Ti, on average, I guess, going through most of the games here. So that's, something worth considering, is you can just kind of take whatever the difference here is and kind of cut it by half. That's about what you're going to see on the GTX 1070. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on the showdown here with the 980 Ti and the GTX 1080, and I will catch you next time. Ta-ra.